Checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
So I'm just going to kind of, so this is Dots, a game I developed and designed in early 2013. I'm just going to kind of go through the quick history of that, how it came to be, and then sort of where it's gone since then. So I went to school in upstate New York in a place called RIT, and it's in Rochester, sort of for IT New Media, which was like art and technology. I kind of left early to join a company called Vimeo, which was kind of an amazing place at the time. It was like super small, and they kind of grew to what it is today. So I got to sort of witness that and sort of saw that how this sort of collective of really creative, talented people could sort of come together and make something amazing. Kind of bounced around freelance, kind of joined the startup world, and so sort of during the freelance and sort of startup time, I did a lot of sort of just creative, sort of self-driven projects, and kind of set constraints for myself and sort of worked within those to see what would sort of happen. So this one was to sort of find somebody, sort of a prominent figure, draw an illustration of them, and sort of research a little bit about them. So I would do one of these every day for about, I think I did like 75. So it was a good way to like sort of grow my illustration skills as well as sort of like learn about really interesting, successful people. This was one that was sort of called Lessons from a Dog, where I was just sort of watching. I never had a dog growing up, so I was working out of this co-working space and just kind of was trying to get lessons out of sort of watching dogs sort of interact and run around for the first time. This was a kind of funny one where I would just sort of make puns on popular rappers, do an illustration of them, and then this was another weird one where it's like a mashup sort of between a soundtrack of a movie called 500 Days of Summer and the rapper Lil Wayne. So again, just kind of weird constraints and just taking them really seriously and like making sure I executed on something. So what all these were doing was just sort of like growing skill sets and sort of like, a free form place to sort of learn and experiment and sort of fail or succeed. And over time, those skills sort of compounded. So through those, there was sort of this plethora of projects. Through those, some like sort of interesting opportunities came. So this was an illustration I did sort of right after President Obama got elected. And it was kind of like an influx of people wanting a print of it. And so it was kind of like a quick moment decision to like, I went and bought a printer and started printing like prints out and shipping them and sold like a couple hundred. And then another one, the Lessons from a Dog sort of project got turned into a book like 4 years later. So it's sort of like a good reminder to put stuff out into the world and kind of unsure what can happen from it. Okay, so after, that was all sort of during, I was in the startup world and sort of freelancing, doing a lot of just technology-based stuff. So then I found a company called BetaWorks in New York. They're an incubator / investment, like sort of seed level investor. And they started a program called the Hack in Residence program, where sort of 8 people were tasked to prototype an idea and launch it within 3 to 4 months. So that was right at the beginning of 2013. And Paul was sort of the leader of that. So at the time, I had this game on the subway in New York where I would sort of see how many people in a row would be on mobile devices, like doing stuff. So it was definitely like a trend that was moving upward, and I could just tell people were, were looking for things to do on their mobile devices. And there was definitely a handful of games out there that were, resonating, but none of them like kind of felt made for me. So, given the sort of task of prototyping something in a couple months, I was sort of gravitating towards games. But wasn't quite sure what type of game or anything like that. I just knew I kind of wanted it to look and feel a little bit different. So the previous year, I kind of took this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, like trip to go to Japan. And so I went to this city called Matsumoto, where they were doing this sort of retrospective of this artist named Kusama's work. And so there was sort of the whole little town was covered with dots. And I think it just stuck in my head that beauty and fun weren't necessarily like they weren't mutually exclusive. They could sort of coexist. This was another thing she did where the sort of exhibit starts as a stark white room and everyone's given a packet of stickers to place wherever they want, and sort of over time it becomes this kind of amazing thing. Again, sort of fun and beauty. So that was sort of the inspiration rattling around, and sort of the task at hand is create something in 3 months. So these were sort of the early prototypes. Again, I was just trying to like sort of put something on the screen that felt right, and not really knowing what the sort of rule set or anything was. So the one on the sort of right started to feel like there was something there. I just instinctually wanted to start connecting the dots. So that's kind of the first start of it. And they were like a little ugly, but they were exciting. You could tell there was kind of something there. So the other cool thing about BetaWorks is that it's sort of, there's a bunch of small companies working out of there, and just a lot of people, interesting people coming in and out, and they are people who are used to sort of trying stuff really early on, and it's a really good test audience for stuff. So we sent out the game to all the people there, started seeing a little bit of rough analytics of like when people were playing, and we noticed a couple of people playing like 4 in the morning and sort of odd times, and playing for 20 or 30 minutes. So it was like a sign of life that there was something there. So we started to get feedback from those people. This was kind of the first low point where all these people were sort of telling me what to do with it next, and sort of making really good suggestions. But I just it was like a 2-person team. So this was one of the emails that I got after sort of saying I felt like overwhelmed by a lot of the responses. This guy named Jace said, I'm just data dumping every idea I have in case it might be useful with 0 expectations. I encourage you to tell me to shut the fuck up whenever necessary. Superlative work so far, keep it up. So that was like a nice sigh of relief that's like, okay, all these suggestions are coming from a good place. They want it to be like a good thing. They're not necessarily criticizing it for what it's not. So the deadline was sort of approaching, and so found some sound composers that we met at a party. It was kind of kismet, and they really took it to the next level. They sort of did this amazing work. Just started simplifying everything that wasn't completely working. We just kind of took out and made it feel really intuitive and balanced and simple. I think one of the things was I really wanted my mom to be able to play it, and somebody who like doesn't play games at all. So the scoring was just really simple. Every dot removed is 1 point. A lot of the games out there were really convoluted and sort of hard to sort of grasp what was going on. So launch days, we had really naive expectations. I think we knew that, we did see that the early sign of life with the people at BetaWorks, that people were playing, which was really cool. So we thought it could do okay. We kind of weren't ready for what happened. So we got like 1 million people in the first week, 5 million in the first month, and it's kind of grown since then. So that was sort of the freak out number 2. Just kind of feeling, so through all this, I think the other thing that BetaWorks does really well is sort of, they can get press attention. So when this thing was sort of taking off, talking to people like the New York Times and all these crazy people asking how we did it, and didn't have a lot of answers. So these were sort of passion and a lot of luck was what I kept saying. And just felt like I don't know, I felt bad for not having like a clear, way to replicate this. And we also were going through a bunch of scaling problems, so it just felt like there was a lot of problems going on. And through this, I kind of learned to trust this guy named Shri, who sort of was the back-end guy and helped me during a lot of like sort of panic moments. So that was a good sort of learning experience. So as it started taking off, we felt like there was something there. There was definitely more to do with this sort of approach to games. So we started the company, and what this reminded me of was something in high school. I really wanted a car with a sunroof, so I cut a hole in this Toyota Corolla that we had. And I think at the time I was just sort of acting on impulse, and when I kind of sobered up, not literally, but after I kind of got through the process of it, I was like, what did I just do? It's kind of a mess. And I shared this car with my parents, and they were sort of like, what did you do? But I think there's 2 ways to sort of look at that. It's like a childish mess or an interesting problem. And that's sort of how the company felt. It's like, this thing was totally, duct taped together and like doing really well, but, behind the scenes kind of a mess that needed to be cleaned up. And so Paul, who's the guy sort of been head of the HIR program, saw a lot of potential, and I think him and I both just like were the inverses of each other. He was like super business savvy, but appreciated creativity, and I was sort of the inverse of that. So, over those 3 months, we had a really good sort of respect for one another. He saw like a huge growing market, and we just saw like a powerful thing in connecting ideas, sort of like, we took that weird inspiration from the high art world and sort of, brought it into people's hands. So that was sort of what we wanted to found the company around. So our core metric is how players feel about our games. We won't take advantage of people, and we believe that decisions made for short-term games become long-term blemishes. So that was sort of the thing I wrote, the month after we launched and sort of decided to go further with it. So we had this game with a huge audience, but it didn't really monetize that well. We had like in-app purchases, but they weren't very exposed, and it was very optional, which was by design. We didn't want people to feel like cheated or anything like that. So we did this thing with GE, which was sort of they had this thing called Gravity Day. So we did this sort of native advertising thing with them. But what was cool is that we kind of used that money to build this feature, which was like, you press the gravity button, they all sort of fall down and then snap back up. And it's kind of a game thing. It shuffles the board and lets new connections be formed. So we did that, and we had it there for a week, and we kind of, we weren't going to leave the advertisement up, but people got really mad when we took it away. So we've since sort of reintroduced it as an in-app purchase called Endless Mode that is sort of like the #1 seller in the game now. So it's a cool way of using advertising to fund sort of product development. So we knew we wanted to grow. We started hiring more sort of people with kind of diverse backgrounds, hoping that we can like connect weird ideas. David was kind of and really early on, I think the first full-time person after Paul and I. And he was this guy I met. He was in the advertising world, and just the first time I met him, he kind of, gave me a lot of his time to just show me how 3D modeling worked, or 3D sort of rigging. So this guy that just has a ton of experience and just a great teacher and leader. And so I met him years prior, and then I was just like a clear thing. This guy loves games. He needs to be in games. He's in advertising. Let's bring him over. So we lucked out. He sort of joined, and we kind of looked at what we had, what we had stripped away from the original game. And there was these things called puzzles, and they weren't totally perfect, but there was something there. They were a little more of a challenge than the sort of arcadey type game. So we turned that into 2 dots. David is sort of like the main force behind that. And so in these, you kind of have a goal at the top. You're trying to sync 8 anchors, and the sort of new mechanics that are introduced over time in the game. And it was way different, and I kind of didn't know how it would do. Again, it was sort of like naive expectations. So we had 5 full-time employees at that time. We built that in about 4 months, which is about the same time the first one took to make. But it was like so much more elaborate. And we worked with outside illustrators and just kind of wanted to make something that looked pretty different. And again, it was such a visual and like gameplay. I think it was a nice sort of extension, but it was way different from the reverse game. So we weren't sure if people would like it, but lucked out. It kind of surpassed a lot of the metrics from the first game. We learned a lot. We started doing sort of a little bit of marketing, both traditional and sort of a little more grassroots. We ranked really well. We hit 1 million. The first 1 million was a week in the first game, so this was like a lot quicker. And this one started like monetizing really well. But we sort of, again, by design, really wanted to respect the players and not sort of squeeze anything out of people unfairly. So that was really cool. Since then, we have a deal with Tencent. They're going to release it in China, so we're kind of working on the sort of internationalized version of that. We're doing cool stuff with the soundtrack. We did an in-store performance at the Apple Store in Soho with the 2 composers who are going to be speaking tomorrow at 3:30, if you guys want to hear more about that. They've also sold albums of the music. So we've trying to take all the creativity that's put into it and sort of see what else is possible. So Freak Out #3 is like what I'm dealing with day to day now. It's like kind of what's next. And it's not totally clear, and that's slightly terrifying. But we kind of have those instincts and ideals that we set up, and a bunch of great people working on it. We're thinking about we're kind of making a bunch of stuff. We're testing new mechanics, modifications on the sort of ones that are there, expansions. Thinking about paid apps. We've only done free apps. We've thinking more about IPs and how those can sort of be changed. And then incentivized ads are sort of a new thing that's popping up. So we're thinking about a ton, making a bunch of stuff. and this was a quote that's kind of too perfect not to say, can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. So to kind of wrap that all up, follow your instincts, embrace your constraints, and build on what you know is sort of what we've been doing. And it's worked out okay so far. Thank you.
Hi. Love the game.
Thank you.
How do you feel about having made a game that's played by 80% women?
So it's a little less than 80%, but it's something interesting that we think about a lot. I think it's great. I think it speaks more to like the number of new people that are playing games and less about the game being skewed one way or the other. So it's something really cool that we think about a lot. I don't know. I personally like it.
I love the game too. Do you guys only have organic downloads, or did you guys do any user acquisition at all?
Yeah, I think we definitely hit this point where we realized UA like has to be part of the equation. It's kind of like there's too many people, in that market to not at least consider it. So it's something we do focus on, not entirely. We also do sort of the weird, sort of more markety, sort of more organic marketing that is like the sort of in-store performance. We post a bunch of like amazing illustrations on Facebook and sort of, keep people excited while they're waiting for levels there. So it's part of the equation, but it's certainly not the main sort of answer.
You said your core metric is how players feel about your game. Do you have a way to measure that, or just monitor it, keep in touch with it?
Yeah, I think the guy Toby makes like every level in 2 dots basically. When they come out, he'll look at all the tweets and sort of see how people feel about it. It's definitely something that's less measurable than sort of session length and stuff like that. But it really is something we focus on a lot. And I think there was one section in the jungle that had, or sort of the fire dots and monster dots sort of weren't completely loved by players, and that's something we, really took into account when we designed new mechanics and sort of make sure they don't feel quite like that. We also sort of rebalance levels occasionally to make sure that people don't feel slighted by them. So yeah, it's a hard one to measure, but we try our best.
Can you talk at all about your choice of technology platforms like Unity and Cocos 2D?
Yeah, so we started on Cocos 2D for the first game, and then we found a solution called App Portable that would sort of convert it to Android, and that was kind of amazing really early on when we were only a couple people, but it just came really hard to sort of maintain that. So we've switched completely over to Unity. So we rewrote the first game in Unity, and then the second game to Unity as well. And that's been really great so far. A little bit of file size issue, but we're working on it.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions.
Sure.
Firstly, have you actually thought about brand extensions? I mean, this is you've got 25 million people playing this, and it strikes me there's a huge opportunity there for brand extensions in terms of T-shirts and all that kind of stuff. Are you sort of marching out into that area at all?
So we have the music stuff. We've put out 2 albums and seen definitely good response when we put it in the game. I think the tricky thing with that is that that's our main channel to talk to players, and so we're really careful about what we put in there. We don't want to overwhelm players. So something we think about a lot. I feel like I've said that a bunch. We're thinking about a lot of stuff. I think we're really careful about what we commit to and do that. We just got some T-shirt made, which I'm psyched on. Yeah, and we've also done a lot of sort of animation work on the social side and seen some good responses there. But again, we want to really respect what those millions of people want to see and sort of make sure that it's in line with what they signed up for.
Okay, and then the other question I have is, you talked about the deal with Tencent, for example. Are you just localizing language, or are you actually making any adjustments to gameplay for regionalization?
Yeah, I think we did a few tests, and we were realizing that we really do need to change the gameplay a lot. And also, it's kind of an opportunity to look at everything we've learned and sort of restructure the sort of mechanics. So a lot of the best mechanics have come out in the past 2 months. When we're, it's kind of amazing how much depth there is to such a simple game. So a lot of the best stuff has come out, really recently. So we could kind of shift that to the beginning and make like a really good experience for sort of that audience. So we're rethinking kind of a lot, but still keeping what's working with it.
The last question I have is a pretty simple one. My wife plays this incessantly. She's sitting at the back there, and she's desperate to know of any tricks or tips that you can hand out in terms of playing this.
Sure. Squares. Squares are definitely the easy one. I know a guy that I can connect you to. That can tell you everything.
Okay. There's more questions. Excellent. Good.
Hi, just one question. If you look back, so say, on levels that you have made in analytics, what are the key KPIs that you're looking at for those?
Sure. So we do look at like how much money stuff makes. We also look at, more importantly, sort of the win rates, and also like if people abandon the game. So it's kind of interesting. We do look at all that, and we have some tools to, whenever we do an app update, we can sort of modify rebalance levels. And we always put that in the notes that we rebalance stuff. And usually it's making stuff easier. I think a lot of times we find that players just get too frustrated and will abandon the game, or at least wait until we rebalance it. So it's a lot of times we just make stuff easier based on people getting too frustrated. So it's kind of cool. Over time we're like creating this really nice sort of difficulty path. Yeah. Cool. Thank you guys so much.
All right, thank you very much.